A lot of Chris's and Don's in this thing, yeah.
It's all Chris's and Don's.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should all be Dons.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay, aloha. My name is Roger Jelinek. I'm Executive Director of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival, and it's my great pleasure to welcome attendees and welcome this panel of distinguished writers, a really remarkable panel. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Don Wallace, who will be the moderator. Over to you, Don.
Okay, thank you, Roger Jelinek, the man who's turned our October into a marathon of Zoom events. And really, thank you, because as Chris was saying earlier, we're all antisocial now, and all we do is attend to these things. And it's healthier than television. So I'm Don Wallace. I'm the editor of the Hawaii Review of Books, or THROB, and also a contributing editor at Honolulu Magazine. And joining us here, we have people who have all made a certain list, 134 essential Hawaii books that Honolulu published recently that you can find online. And I guess what I'll do is I'll have each of them introduce themselves, give the title of book, name of their dog, their kid, and we'll just sort of kick off a discussion of where does Hawaii writing go from here? And we have a good age group here, and so I think I'll start with Kristiana Kahakauwila. Good to see you.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, I'm Kristiana Kahakauwila. I was born and raised in California. My dad's side of the family is from Maui, particularly Wailuku area. And I have spent my childhood and now adulthood kind of going back and forth between the mainland and Hawaii. And now I think I'm here for a nice long haul, teaching at University of Hawaii and living in the beautiful valley of Mānoa. I said I wouldn't hold anything up, so now I'm holding something up just because I said I wouldn't. This is my book. This is Paradise, collection of short stories about Hawaii.
Very good. I think we better go with Chris, because Don Ching has vanished briefly. Chris McKinney, and yeah. No one is going to know your name, so you might as well say it again.
Okay, I'm Chris McKinney, author of The Tattoo. My latest novel was Midnight Water City, which came out last summer. The sequel to that book is coming out this summer. And the third, which will complete the trilogy, should be out in December.
Great. And the title of that one is?
So it's the first one's Midnight Water City. The second one will be Eventide Water City. And the third will be Sunset Water City. And it's all sci-fi set, 120 to 150 years in the future. And a large portion of it is actually set in a sort of futuristic Hawaii.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to that. And Don Carreira Ching. Good to see you, Don.
Good to see you.
What are you doing here? You got a bridge behind you. So what's going on in your life?
Kahalu.
Well, Kahalu Stream Bridge. My name is Don Carreira Ching. I'm born and raised in Kahalu on the island of Oahu. For the purposes of the session and so we don't get confused, I'll be Donald, not Don, just so there's no lots of Dons and Chris's here. So I'm an educator, I'm a writer. I've been editing as well, occasionally for Bamboo Ridge. My novel Between Sky and Sea, A Family Struggle is here, and I'm currently working on a collection of short stories based around issues in contemporary Hawaii, such as climate change, the meth epidemic, of course, and some other things as well. Thank you.
And so first, I want to thank you guys for saying yes and coming on to discuss something as sort of blue sky as where does Hawaii writing go from here? Because I think the first question is, what do we mean by here? I was thinking of just asking each of you, where do you think, what's your idea of what Hawaii writing, where it's at right now? Is there a distinctive scene or a movement? Are you feeling something vaguer that you feel connected to? In other words, what says Hawaii writing to you? And I'm going to just say whoever wants to talk gets to talk.
Anyone want to
I'll
talk?
call on you. Okay, Chris, with the most number of books, you get it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, part of it is a reflection of Hawaii itself. I mean, there's clearly diversity, not just not just ethnically or genre wise, but it's, people are doing a bunch of different things. We have people who write poetry, we have people who write novels. I would say that I spent a lot of years feeling like as if it was sort of a little bit disjointed and not a community. But as the years passed by, it occurred to me that I know everybody, so it must be a community, right? And I think that it's kind of funny, when I first started out, I sort of felt alone, but I never really was. And I think that the community needs leaders like Don, needs people who sort of pull people together to keep us all in touch and aware of what each other are doing. And I think that the future is bright.
And how about you, Donald? Since you're living there on the windward side, you're drenched in rain. What brought you to Hawaii writing as something that you connected to and drew you into it?
I think Hawaii writing, or writing about, I think all of my work to some degree is connected to the community that I'm from. And I think Hawaii writing allowed me the opportunity to explore and engage with that, and to sort of grapple with the things that I was seeing on a daily basis in terms of the problems and issues and discussions that were being had. So, I mean, that's how that's my sort of way that I see writing, and why writing is important to me, and kind of why I write. I think that sense of community or communities that Chris is talking about, I think is really key to Hawaii writing. I mean, it's just Hawaii in general. The idea of sort of, it's a small place, but it feels big, or, whatever you want to say, you sort of know everyone there. I mean, I think what's funny is, I held up my novel earlier, and both Chris and Tiana, wrote blurbs for that book, as sort of an example of that community. And I think, but their intersections and things go in different directions as it's kind of developed. It's a very interesting question about sort of where we're at right now, because I think we're about, quite a ways from where we were maybe 45 years ago or so. But at the same time, when it comes to Hawaii writing beyond Hawaii, are we any, how has that sort of changed? How is that the same? How is that different? But I think that's perhaps for later conversations.
Yeah, we'll get there, definitely. And Tiana, so you were coming to Hawaii from California with all your roots and everything, and visiting Hawaii. But I'm from California too, so I came to Hawaii kind of through my wife, who's from here, but I'd already visited before I met her. So what was it like for you discovering or becoming a part of the Hawaii literary community, such as it is?
Yeah, I mean, I come a lot as a child. My dad worked for an airliner, so we could come over a lot and spend a lot of time with the family here. But when I came kind of on my own terms and as an adult, it was after getting my MFA, and it was 2007. And I was teaching as an adjunct up at Chaminade, and I remember reading Chris's book, The Tattoo, at that point, and it was really important to me because there was literature that was very contemporary, and I don't mean only set in the present moment, more or less, but like very contemporary in the issues it was dealing with. And I think that was like a turning point for me in understanding how I would want to write about this place, or how I would want to write about my family, or if not directly, then like ideas of family in Hawaii. So yeah, I think like now, about a decade plus since then, like cli-fi, speculative fiction. I know Bamboo Ridge has, I think, a reading coming up at the shop for its anthology of speculative fiction. yeah, sci-fi, like there's just this like so many like awesome books of noir, and it feels like all of that feels present, feels future looking. And the other thing I'd say is like I really appreciate how contemporary writers in our community, really for the most part, are thinking about what it means to either be Kanaka Maoli or be in relation with Kanaka Maoli and their lands. And that feels like an important political move, an important ethical one, but it also like opens up this conversation about what it means really to be here and what it means to be in relationship with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was hoping someone would just lay it all out the way you just did. We're kind of in a moment. I mean, it's popping. And I love the sci-fi anthology, Donald. But as well, I mean, in just the last year, we've had like Na'u Ravia with her poems winning awards. We have Hanya Yanagihara coming out with her book To Paradise, which took a lot of people aback because I actually interviewed her in 2018, and she said she doesn't write about Hawaii. So that was interesting. And we have Joseph Hahn's book, and Derek Witsuji just got his poems. Jeff Higa's book of stories. It's Scott Kakao is just knocking them down. So this is really new. I mean, I go back like Chris and Donald, as we're calling him. I go back here to the 76 Talk Story Conference. And so, we all heard Ozzie Bushnell give his speech and kind of exhorting writers to pick it up, to grab it and run with it. And I feel like it's gone up and it's gone down, it's gone up because, the economy and stuff changes, but something is really happening here. And you guys are really a big part of it. So I guess I'm going to give you a chance here. What was your local book? Like Tiana, it was The Tattoo. Don, what was a local book that opened the door for you?
It's probably Rodney Morales, When the Shark Bites. Not a book, but the story. I'm a short story writer. I sort of stumbled into writing the novel. It wasn't that to begin with. And I think probably Eric Chalk's poem for George Helm was another kind of powerful moment as well. And of course, I mean, I read The Tattoo as well when I was a kid. Great book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, Chris hears that a lot. So I guess who is inspiring you now to do something, to do what you're doing now? Maybe Donald, will continue with you because you're a short story writer. So what, and I was just reading an article about Donald Barthelme. I don't know if anyone remembers him now. And I was thinking, God, that dude was so hot. And now I don't think I'd ever want to read him again. He had his moment, but it's so foreign to what we're thinking about and how we're writing and what we're thinking. And so tell us, short story writer, what's your subject matter and how you go about it and what inspires you?
I think that's just hilarious that you're bringing him up just because there's all kinds of reasons, but I'm not going to get into that conversation. I think I think what inspires me. I mean, again, I think it just comes back to community. I mean, I think I've always been drawn to I've been drawn to this place because of how important it is to me, but just how complicated it is in terms of the kinds of issues and topics that are happening in Hawaii. And I think we are around, I think, about 45 years removed from Talk Story, but the sort of issues that still surround kind of like, selling Hawaii literature to presses outside of Hawaii still exists. Selling Hawaii literature to presses in Hawaii still exists. I mean, you asked the question of sort of kind of what do we find inspiration from? And as a fiction writer, I mean, I don't know too many short story writers personally. I could name a few, but when I think about the publishers here in Hawaii that are publishing fiction, that are publishing poetry, I can name probably two. Or maybe just a few more than that. I mean, regularly publishing these kinds of things. And I think sort of outside of that, I mean, you did give a lot of really great examples. I think a lot of great books that have come out recently. But considering how long, it's been since the Top Story Conference, and before that as well, when we're thinking about other communities of writers and their history of telling story. I don't know how far have we come in that particular aspect is sort of the thing I think about in that regard. But I think the people in this Zoom here give me inspiration. The people in like the collection that Bamboo Ridge recently published, Kipuka, give me inspiration. I think that kind of those new voices that are coming out and that just show that these stories are still necessary.
Do you feel like seen and heard, encouraged to keep going? Because the short story, you're the purist in the group here. Well, Tiana, you're still a purist until you finish that novel. So both of you, the short story is, I think, where we all start. Probably the poem and then the short story. But how do you feed yourself? How do you keep going? I don't mean food. He's gesturing to you, Tiana.
Oh, you said I don't mean food, and all I thought was like a whole list of foods. That was the only thing I was thinking. Okay. I mean, like squid luau and obviously reading is like a big way I feed myself. And Joseph Hahn's book was fantastic. I think also the care that the press took, Counterpoint Press took with that book, and it is an indie press, and even down to the details of like the little squiggly that divides, we have sometimes little squigglies that divide sections that are like a little more of a divide than just white space, and like that shape is the wall in the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. I mean, those kind of details and caring was really beautiful to me. So the book is beautiful, but also like this, press's affection for the book was beautiful. I think I'm trying to, I like the theory side of things. So like I love Brandy Nellie McDougall's poetry, but I love finding meaning, which is her monograph. And I love seeing that from our writers, that they're almost always practicing poetry and fiction and short fiction and dreaming both like theoretically and dreaming creatively, and that means a lot. And and I think like one way I could really grow and probably get a lot more inspiration is with visual arts. And I think that's like an area I want to explore more, because I think there's just so much crossover. And Westlake is one who's, I think of him for poetry, but he also did visual art. I'm thinking like concrete poems. Anyway, I think that's just one area of growth for me.
Right. And I mean, Westlake, I'm glad you brought him up, because, we need these books back in print that are on this list. And he is in print. I saw him at the shop. So I picked up that red book and I said, oh my God, I haven't seen this in years. And Hawaii really has it all, but it's also unique. And so we have, that's kind of a thing that we have that is ours. I use we in the sense that I'm just like here being your fan. So Chris is the guy who has the long track record, and Chris and I have a long track record. And I can remember working really hard to get traction in the community, to get readers, for your books to find eyes, basically. And Chris, I know that after Boy No Good, you kind of decided you would switch courses because you wanted to reach out and bust out and try something else. And I'm just wondering, now you did film, correct?
Yeah.
Now, would you recommend writers, this is a loaded question, would you recommend fiction writers take a hiatus and try film? Is there anything besides the stardom and the carpet?
I would say that my experiences in screenwriting and, a little bit of experience in production, the biggest takeaway for me was how to write plot. And how to write something that's more plot driven, because you almost have to. The other thing, my other big takeaway from delving into film, indie film set here, was that I had exhausted everything I had cared to say about this place in about 6, 7 books. And I started repeating myself. And it's not that because I certainly don't know everything about this place. I just exhausted my knowledge of this place. And it became, so I felt a little lost. And I thought, well, what am I going to do next? Because this is kind of the thing that I know. And I've always loved sci-fi. I've always loved fantasy. And it just struck me as sort of an obvious thing to try. And I've tried it and it's working out pretty well. So yeah, I think that people shouldn't really be pigeonholed into thinking what they should write. If you write what you feel like writing, if you're, I'm sort of like I've been a secret sci-fi nerd since I was a little kid. So it's just sort of, that's probably what I've always wanted to try at one point or another. And, finally, as I'm, heading towards 50, I gave it a shot. So yeah, and it's fun. It's freeing. And like I said, there was a limitation on what I could do, speak like as far as a whole book speaking about this place.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, did film in a way lead to sci-fi because it was freeing, and then suddenly like the shackles are off. I can write an Avengers, or whatever.
Maybe the sort of cutthroat, let's see if I can make money doing this thing part of film sort of helped that. But it's just sort of, but no, it was more, it was me writing a screenplay and co-executive producing indie feature film that basically resembled The Tattoo a little bit too much for my comfort. It's sort of like I wrote that thing. Well, yeah, I wrote that thing almost like over 2 decades ago. Am I really telling kind of a similar story 20 something years later? What am I doing? So it's just sort of, and why am I even trying to make a movie? I'm a writer. What am I doing? So it was just more of that as the wake up call, I guess.
Right, but then again, Hawaii has a lot of more of that. That's one of the things that makes it actually, the grooves are deep, like Donald's book Between Sky and Sea. It deals with family addiction, and it does it in a really, really honest way. And it kind of goes in the opposite direction of what you might expect. The typical, everyone writes drug stories now, but to write a human story with drugs in it is a whole different thing. And he did it really well. And I'm just saying, it's interesting. We have The Tattoo, which has an element of that, and some of the others, and Sky and Sea, which I remember it just captured that feeling of the ocean coming down to the flat ocean, to the sky coming down to the flat sea, and the horizon line vanishing, and the dissolving of hope. And it was really quite an emotional read and a quiet one. So Donald, tell us something about how you stimulate yourself or find inspiration doing the same old that Chris is talking about.
Wow, I'm just humbled by that lead in. I think what Chris is describing is such a real sort of struggle as you're writing and you're sort of trying to figure out, like, once I was just talking to someone else about sort of the grief you feel after you finish a project, the sort of sense of like, where do I go next and what do I do and how do I do it so it's not derivative of something else I've done? And you struggle a lot with sort of writing something and throwing it away or doing something else with it. And like Chris, I also gravitated towards sci-fi and speculative fiction, and I have a couple of pieces that I worked on, some related to Hawaii and some not. But I think, I go back to this sort of in one of George Saunders' most recent books. He talks about, as a writer, you sort of have to think about where the energy is for you and where you feel the most passionate about and kind of go with that and channel that, because that's the sort of momentum that's going to keep you going as a writer, because you're really not going to get rich as a writer. I think if we're 3 writers here are all teachers, we're all professors, right? Our probably number one job is that. Maybe except perhaps the exception of I don't know, Chris with the films. but I mean, we're all teachers in that particular respect. But I think the things that keep me going and the things that brought me back to, again, sort of writing about this place is, I think, the nuances that haven't been explored. I mean, you're right in the sense that, like if we're talking about like the meth epidemic, it's been written in various ways by various people many different times and in different ways. But there's still conversations that haven't been had about that and the connections between that and other facets of what's affecting the communities here in Hawaii, how that relates to gentrification, how that relates to colonialism and those kinds of things. And although they have been explored, they're still being explored, right? And so I think there's that, and just sort of finding those human stories in those conversations. I think I'm a very character, that's why I love short story. I'm a very character-oriented person. I mean, I'm always drawn to characters more than plot. As sort of the profluence that drives me in my stories. But, also like, I think Tiana, I probably am most inspired by things that are not writing when I go to a museum or I'm having conversations or talking with my father-in-law or talking with my wife. And the little conversations. I mean, I was recently in Denver and I was talking with someone and he just made this really great line about, he was talking about growing up in Cleveland. And he said, when it snows, it stays in Cleveland. And I just really love the poetry of that line. And that turned into a whole story for me related to something. So, I think that's what drives me is just sort of being here. And I my wife and I we lived in London for a year. We've traveled, we've been to other places. We've thought about moving because, I mean, Hawaii, like, how do you survive in Hawaii? But, you return to this place because, and I return to this place as a writer because there's just so much more there. I mean, there's more there, right? That's for me how it goes anyway.
Yeah.
You.
You brought up something that's, of course, very touchy among writers, which is the MFA, the being a professor. And I'm just wondering, we all went through it. I went through it, and I'm not a professor. I just look like one. So what do you went through programs, I believe. Tiana, did you go on the mainland? So you had you and I had the different experience, and I think Donald and Chris, you guys went UH. So Tiana, tell us what it was like, what they were teaching and what we were being affected by, whether it was theory or your peers, and then trying to translate where you came from and what you wanted to do into what can be a kind of rigid or can feel like a rigid set of expectations.
Yeah, I was a comparative literature major as an undergrad, but I also studied creative writing. So like my first workshop experiences were as an undergrad, and there were like high highs and low lows in terms of like what I was writing about and also how feedback was happening. And then graduate school was overall really great. And I think that's because I studied with Peter Ho Davies, who's Welsh, Chinese, now American citizen, and Michael Byers. And both of them really had perspectives on writing in the workshop that like fostered good discussion and were about helping the writer bring out their own best work, and not coming in with ideas of what something already is. So I could write about Hawaii in graduate school and my relationship of kind of moving back and forth and being in the diaspora, and actually have people who, whether they knew that sensation or not, were like ready to help me make the story what it had to be. And that was super important. And so like now teaching here at UH, that's something that matters a lot to me. And I'm looking at folks like Matthew Salace's book, Craft in the Real World, that, are helping that happen. When we come to not even critique, but come to discuss and grow one another's work. Yeah, so that was at least my experience with both undergrad and graduate school writing feedback.
Yeah, well, it's such an incredible distance we've traveled. My wife and I went to Iowa, and we started in '75, and we met the fall of '75 when we were in separate workshops, and we both put up stories about Hawaii. Yes, I'm the guy from Long Beach putting up a story about Hawaii because I'd been there when I was 16. And she hated it, but what was worse was our classes hated them, and they trashed us. And that's literally kind of how we met. Someone said, "Oh, you two have to meet." And, it was there were almost no people of color, although people of color were actually very strong. We had Joy Harjo and Sandra Cisneros and Rita Dove, but at the same time, there was no room for other material that you might call from, different lands, different cultures, different ethnicities. It was that, it was white world. And so we've come so far, it's almost like, welcome to the brave new world. And you're the guys that are making it. So what are you telling your students, or what are you seeing in your students? Is there ambition? Is there freedom? Chris, your turn.
Just the sort of say a little bit more about the diversity that exists now. I mean, for the last couple of years, I've habitually been reading bestsellers, just out of curiosity to see what books sell, what's out there. And a comforting amount is about racial identity, ethnic identity. There's a lot. And they sell well. They're doing great. I mean, I just finished reading a book called Shutter, and it's about police forensic photographer in Albuquerque who's Native American, and it's wonderful. It is just it's a really good. I read a book called Sankofa about it's almost as the main character is a woman who has roots in Africa, but she never really knew her father. So it's, she actually, as a middle-aged person, she goes back and sort of discovers that he's this dictator, he was this dictator in Africa. Wonderful book. So, the literary scene just on a national scale is really rich when it comes to that kind of stuff, which is great. As far as my students, ambitious, no. And I don't think I don't think classrooms really give birth to writers necessarily, because I mean, you're either ambitious or you're not. You either get lucky or you don't. I don't see a great deal of ambition, which is fine. It's not as if I'm searching for the next writer. I'm not searching for. I remember back in the day, I don't know if it was Lum or Chalk, those two pioneers, but one of them wrote an article or something about the big fish. Who's going to be the big fish? And we've already had a bunch of big fish. You know what I mean? If you think about it, Lois Ann Yamanaka, we had, Kiana Davenport, we've had Kawi Hemmings, geez, I mean, these more,
You're a fish. You're a fish. You're a fish.
I'm a juvenile mahi maybe. That's about it. But it's just sort of yeah. So yeah, I don't know, I don't know how much the classroom produces writers. Or it doesn't produce ambition, I don't think. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that comports with what I experienced. For me, it was just a way to not take a class with a grade at the end of it. But of course, all I really wanted to do was write. And that was why,
And you made your living doing it for years and years and years. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like you've written for all of these awesome magazines, and you've written, a novel. You've written the French House. I mean, it's did Iowa really? It in fact discouraged you from pursuing this, and yet you just pursued it for decades.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just say, for all you people who are out there struggling or, not getting it. I went 10 years where I sent out, I had the little book of short stories you sent out in the chart you keep. I went 10 years without an acceptance, and after Iowa. And at that point, you remake yourself totally as a writer, and you remake your attitude to why you write. And the reason you write is because of what's inside of you and what you want to say. And
we've talked about this before, Don, and we can't help ourselves. I mean, it's compulsive behavior. It's kind of loony, but yeah. So it's just sort of
Okay. Well, so Don, I'm hoping maybe. Oh, Tiana, you wait.
Yeah. Sorry, Donald. I got to jump in because I have to put in. I have to argue for the classroom really quickly, and I'll say why. It's okay. Sure, you might learn something about like plot, or you might learn something about epiphany or whatever. I think what's really important though is that you can get a community out of that. And you mentioned Shutter, and that novel's by Ramona Emerson. She's a graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts. That's where she got her MFA, which is a program I teach in or have taught in on a small break right now. And I think it matters when you're surrounded by other folks who care about similar issues and maybe coming at them from very different angles, politically, in terms of identity, in terms of genre, but they also like get what you're talking about. And so like Ramona to be sharing her work at IAIA, you know, I'm Pueblo land, but a hop, skip, and a jump from Navajo Nation, like makes all the difference in the world. And I think that's something that I care about a great deal here, is like, for me to care for writers who for the most part come from this place and want to write about this place, and who are now going to know one another and like grow this next generation. And I can't, you're right, I can't make them ambitious. I can't force them to learn anything, but I can tell them like the person seated next to you is your lifeline. I'm not your lifeline. I'm a different generation. I got my own lifelines over here. But like the conversations you're starting now are the ones I hope like you keep debating for the rest of your lives. And you do it not only in person, but you start to do it in your work.
I mean, man,
so that's my plug. That's my plug for going to college.
Good plug.
Because, you know, the bottom line is, you know, Donald and I went, you know, we matriculated through the Mānoa, you know, graduate program, creative writing or whatever. Is Mānoa kind of needs you. I mean, honestly, I mean, it had Macmillan for years and years and years. I mean, maybe you are what the fiction, you know, what fiction writing needs at Mānoa, because I don't know. I'm just saying,
yeah,
what's really been coming out of there. Just saying.
Well, Joseph and No'u.
Well, there's a lot of good writers that are coming out of there. Yeah, Joseph and No'u as two examples. I mean, I have to agree. I mean, I think the classroom is such an important place to sort of facilitate and foster and guide. I mean, when I entered Windward Community College, I didn't want to be a writer. I had lost my love for reading and writing in high school. And, you know, I was lucky to be taught by someone who became a friend of mine, Jody Helfand, who was an amazing poet, still is an amazing poet. And his care and attention really reawakened. I mean, my mom wanted me to be a nurse. I wanted to be a psychologist. I think she was a little afraid when I told her I wanted to be an English major. And then I think as I went, you know, I was with him for much of my my undergrad, my community college undergrad, because he was kind of the writer there at Windward. And I think when I got to Manoa, I was lucky to be taught by Morgan Blair, who I know that Chris was taught by. And I think what Morgan taught me was rigor that I didn't understand. I had so much sort of this romanticized sense of what a writer was that she completely broke me in that particular respect. And I had to remake myself. And it really taught me the discipline that I think after I left, you know, I actually returned to UH for the PhD recently. But, you know, I after around 10 years, I would say I was doing okay, fairly well publishing those kinds of things, functioning with very little community besides my wife, who was reading my work and giving me feedback. And I think that was in part because of her. And I also have to mention, you know, a big mentor of mine, which was Craig Howes. And I think I really thrive off of the critical theory as well. And he read what Between Sky and Sea was originally, which was just a short story at the time. That not having any idea of how to publish, I sent to like a bunch of different places. And I remember sending it to Bamboo Ridge and they took forever to get back to me, as Bamboo Ridge does. And so I think I probably sent them 10 more. And then finally, Eric sent me 10 versions of the same story because I kept making changes to it, talking with Craig. And, you know, Eric finally like kind of called me, I think, because back then you had to do it by snail mail and you had to include a phone number per, you know, whatever I read online about it or in the Writer's Digest or Writer's Market. And he said, like, okay, like we're accepting the story, but we've lost track of which one we want. Can you just send me the most recent one, you know? And, you know, I just think like, I think of also like Georgianne Nordstrom and Kristiana Kahakauwila, who are not creative writers there, but were so important to like my development, as well as Rodney Morales. Yeah, I think the classroom just taught me so much, and I think teaching now. I mean, I probably love teaching more than I love writing, and I occasionally teach creative writing at Leeward. I teach a lot of composition and composition 2, English 100 and 200. But the first time I taught fiction, I had a STEM major who was in my class, and she wrote one of the most amazing short stories I had written. Just going through the process, she was not a writer, and she ended up I think becoming a minor in English, but. And she got published. I think those sort of small things are just wonderful. But you never know if you're going to be a writer, because especially in Hawaii, the things that are taught, the ways that they're taught, the sort of the gatekeeping that happens in schools and things like that. Sometimes when they come to your classroom, I don't know. They don't even they have such a stigma about, or not a stigma, but there's such a stigma levied on them sometimes, and their experiences with English sometimes, that can sometimes be the place where they realize for the first time that they have a voice and that they can be writers. And I think that's why it's so important. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you bring up something really important, which is that the stratification of education here in Hawaii is more extreme than anywhere in the country. We have the highest number of private schools, and also a population that's 70%, working minimum wage jobs. And those people, writers come out from everywhere, but it's a lot harder, coming out when you're not getting that good Punahou experience, beautiful thinkers and teachers, and being exposed to it. So I'm glad to hear that you really love teaching, and making the community, like Tiana says, the teaching can be terrible, but the community is going to be there, particularly if you bang elbows and see each other across the campus, or finally admit that you want to be a writer. That's really important stuff. So now let's go. What can Hawaii do to make it better for writers and readers? I got to say, we have some bad news. Costco is going to no longer carry books. Now, I never bought a book from Costco, but I know Bennett Heimer at Mutual Publishing was telling me that was a major driver of sales, particularly at holidays, and they do events. And they're only doing it in Hawaii.
It was weird. I've done a bunch of book signings at Costco's over the years, and it was Bennett, right? So it's just sort of, it was actually, those were some of the best book signings, because people in Costco, the shoppers there are curious. So people would come up to you and just ask, what is this? What are you doing? But yeah, that's sad. It's bad. It's bad news.
So we need to replace that. Yeah. I mean, we have the shop and stuff, but we need to go and colonize a commercial space, and bring books to it. The other piece of news, because I was on a call, a Zoom with my publisher yesterday, and the news is kind of incredible, really. Their fiction sales, they're the largest indie, number 8 of all publishers. Their fiction sales are up 40% this year. And fiction sales have been up in the 30s in the last 3 years. And the best part is, because we all know romance is up, and we all know Colleen Hoover is up. Whoever Colleen Hoover is, she definitely nailed it. She makes up 7% of all book sales at this point. But for straight fiction, with adult fiction, it's up 9%, and it's been marching along. People want fiction now. They used to say they didn't. 5 years ago, it was nonfiction that was going to rule. So we're kings. Now all we have to do is figure out how to find our audience and sell books. So what would you guys like to see? I mean, do we need, the state doesn't give writers any money in the serious way that it gives other things. They're buying paintings all the time. Do we need a bookstore, an institution, or a place where people can pass by? Any ideas?
Buy books, go to readings, support the community. I mean, that's, I think, the most important thing, because we have, you bring up the shop, and we have the Mea, and we have, a lot of great local publishers here in Hawaii. Buy books, come to the readings, come to the events. I think you got to support the community if you want to see it, right? I mean, advocate for I'm talking to sort of the larger audience of folks here and out there on the internet, but I mean, support what you want to see more of, I think is the way it goes. I mean, the market is dictated by sales, unfortunately. So if sales are going in one direction, you know, they're going to start limiting other things. But if the market clearly shows the demand, they're going to support it.
Book trucks, right? We have food trucks. So the book trucks just go wherever there's an event, and they open up the side of the truck and there's books, and maybe authors pop out too. Okay. And I'm going to, let's put that application into the state and get that thing going. Books on wheels. So now this brings up another thing, which was, I did want to, where Hawaii writing is going. Tiana, you are publishing it with a mainstream, a very good publisher. Chris is publishing, you made the leap in your old age to Soho Press in New York. Donald, I think you could do it. Frankly, you could be in the New Yorker. They publish short stories. But what ambitions would you like to see, or else am I going to have to tell you to be ambitious? What are your ambitions for books that are coming that you would like to see from other people, from yourself, wherever, about Hawaii? Shoots.
Well, you know, one area of huge growth, as long as we're talking about market, is you know, young people's literature, and that's like from board books to picture books to MG, middle grade to YA. I see Lurleen is here, of course, between the Deep Blue Sea and me, being just a killer kind of straddling line MG at YA novel. And I think that that's like a huge area of growth. I mean, it's an area that like publishers are looking for, but I think it's also kind of a gorgeous area of growth for writers here. And I think also like this question of how do we get more people to read is also a question about education and structural inequity, that if we don't fund our public schools and our voters decide not to fund our public schools, then that's a problem in terms of reading and writing, and in terms of a love of literature. I think one of the biggest changes we've seen, of course, since like the 90s and prior to that, you know, since the Hawaiian Renaissance, is this desire to get our stories, and I mean that very broadly, into the classroom to kids who are going to recognize themselves in those books. And that's like one of the beauties of having local publishers as well. I'm really bummed about the Costco news. It's like yeah. Costco on Maui supplied, you know, my family with my book.
Right. Yeah.
But I would like it to be a decolonized space, Don, not a colonized space, a decolonized.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was thinking in terms of colonizing a colonized space.
Okay. We can read D.
Yeah. Reseeding it.
I would say the onus is on writers too. I mean, if you're trying to, if that's your audience, if you're talking about the kids here and there who are growing up there, if that's your audience, you gotta write stuff that they can identify with. You know what I mean? So it's just sort of, it's not, it can't just be on the back of education. The writer has to be able to speak that language authentically.
Yeah, that's hard too. That's hard too. Yeah, for sure.
Right. I was going to say writing YA, which I would encourage all of us to try, is hard though, because you're instantly going from the hip cutting edge of fiction to becoming completely out of date and kind of laughable. So I don't know, maybe you enlist your students, Chris, and tag team YA, because I think that's a way of growing readers in Hawaii. Definitely. We need some books that are set here. And that are compulsively readable.
Yeah. Kiana mentioned Nora's daughter, right? She won the freaking Newbery with her book. We need more of that stuff, right? That's awesome. That is terrific. Yeah.
And so let's see, did we get any questions? I see that we're actually moving into our 10 minutes to go. I know Roger asked what my favorite book was, the one that impressed me the most of the 134 that I read and reviewed. By the time I was done, I was a broken man.
How did you do that? What are you doing?
You know, it's been 3 months and my back is only now coming back online. You know, what was great was the responses from people. The 45 people, the voters, the panelists, they loved so many books. They loved books that you wouldn't have thought of. Like the number of passionate responses for Westlake. It was like every other email, Westlake.
Yeah.
The pigeon writers, you know, Brother Joe. I forgot about Brother Joe. We have a book of his somewhere up there, you know. I mean, these are like totally unique in terms of what Hawaii has. And, you know, what it did was it sort of reawoke my whole entire appreciation for this thing that we have here that Hawaii's done, which, you know, I insist on saying we're the only state with a regional literature, because everyone else, the borders are just, you know, the interstate crosses the line. We got this thing. So Roger, that's the answer, is I love them all. They're all my children. I love them equally. I was really impressed with just the books that came out in the last 2 years, including Chris's Midnight Water City, which if you haven't read, you should all read, and Scott Kakauwa's book, which, you know, it's really important that we get a noir detective writer who lives here and is from here, because when I was at Honolulu Magazine, I was getting cheap self-published knockoff versions of this from tourists. And it just, you know, it just irritated me. It infuriated me that I was in Hawaii for 2 weeks and I wrote this, you know, detective series starring. There was this one series that had a Hawaiian, native Hawaiian, of course, cowgirl who had a whip that was blessed by Huna. And, you know, you wanted to go out and strangle that writer. So having Kahakauwa come along and having other writers from here take over the genres, that would be the one thing. Take over all the genres.
What Scott's doing is really cool, because it's sort of, if you think about it, and you know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but the memoir has kind of taken over to me at least, the idea of what one would categorize as literary fiction. I mean, it's just, so now what fiction has become, contemporary fiction, is it's highly genre. So what does Scott write? Scott writes historical noir detective fiction. I think that if you're a young writer and you're kind of looking at the landscape, these are things that I tell my students, right? You know, if you're serious about it, I don't go around saying it to anybody who isn't, but it's just sort of like, part of this, there is a business aspect to this. Understand the business, understand what's out there. And I do feel like there's so many memoirs out there that have sort of taken over that sort of more thoughtful, introspective sort of narrative, that fiction has actually become very specific when it comes to genre. And it's something to think about, at least, or consider. But ultimately, the writer will write whatever they want to write, and which is great. So, but yeah, just 2 cents.
2 cents. Maybe that's what we'll call this segment. Donna, you have 2 cents?
2 cents for a book at the book truck.
And a writer pops out.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I just like the book truck to give away books. I mean, I think about the bookmobile that used to be around all the time. I mean, I think that's the key, getting someone to finance a presser, I mean, just give out the books, just give them everywhere you can. Here's some books, here's some books, here's some books, and just read.
Yeah, like the Scholastic book fairs, right? Only instead of giving all the money to Scholastic, which they do a good job and they're good people for the most part, but why not Bamboo Ridge book fairs, you know? And why not just self-generating YA literature and children's literature and getting it into the hands? I know there's lots out there, and actually the bookstores are full of it. The Best Press doing an amazing job publishing all kinds of stuff, including for the Micronesian islands and Pacifica. And on that note, we should also mention that we have a lot of publications that are covering the Pacific Islands outside now, and Hawaii is kind of helping. We're kind of a hub, and we're allowing books to get published. Robert Barkley has been publishing books from Fiji, you know, from the Marshalls. It's really important that the work he does. He has 2 presses that he's running. Craig Santos Perez is just anthology after anthology. And they've really brought these communities in and made them part of the literary texture here. This is all, I think, you know, we can all do this. We're doing it. And Misty Sanico says, for more news, check out this website. You better give us the URL, Misty. One thing I do want to say in terms of, because I'm a guy who wants to push people out, I want to say New York is waiting for you guys. And Tiana, you're there. Chris, you're there. Donald, you can do it. But you know, they want books from Hawaii. They don't know maybe how much they want them yet. They want books by people in Hawaii, and they want to spend money. They want to give money to people. So we shouldn't let this opportunity pass to mainland writers who, you know, are just going to kind of skim the surface. And if any of you watching out there are writers, I know Chris says if it's in you, it's in you, but it's okay to be ambitious and drop a wish list. I know one very good writer here. I won't embarrass her. She's on the list, but she said, I want to write the Don Quixote of Hawaii. And, you know, I would say, go for it. And yeah. I did. And, you know, be ambitious and draw up that list and, you know, make us proud, get out there. That's the New York speech. Okay.
I mean, can I add? Can I just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
New York has controlled things for too long too. I mean, you mentioned Craig and you mentioned Robert, and I think they are doing wonderful things too. And I don't know. I'm good with New York. New York can have New York because New York wants it, but New York wants to do with what they want to do with it. That's just my speech for local and independence.
As soon as every time I go to New York, I give that speech. You know, I say, you guys are just, you know, you don't know what you're doing. You're ignoring, belittling, and, you know, benighting communities. But I will say I'm kind of worried because, you know, it's Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And if you go to the shop and talk to them, you know, the distribution supply chain issues are really severe. We had an event we could barely get books for. And, you know, the thing that New York, it's going to be controlled, the distribution in a way, but you can game it. They will, if you get on it and you write a book that's that YA genre, for instance, the Amazon AI will be your friend for a while before it devours you. And, you know, I think we shouldn't discourage people from trying, because the next generation, it's just like they're digital natives, right? And I'm not a digital native, and they know things and they are more comfortable and they can really blow it away. And so Donald says, Bamboo Ridge, Hawaii Review, Chaminade Literary Review, Hawaii Pacific Review. That's Tyler McMahon. And many URLs are coming up. Let's talk about what we're going to do in the next 3 minutes. What's your next book, Tiana?
Well, I'm working on a middle grades novel, which is maybe why I've been reading about the market for middle grades in YA. So, yep, working on that right now. And,
Where is it?
Chris, it's set here on Oahu, mostly up on North Shore. Yeah, Chris, like when you talked about plot in terms of film, like you like, you know, touched my heart, but also all my fears, because I'm like into characters and like, where do the characters take me? And like, this has, you know, there has to be like real drive, and like, you know, my main character has to like try to get something and have it not work. So it's totally kind of been teaching me a ton about just writing in general and plot points. And maybe, yeah, going back to also what you were saying about genre, or like wanting to, write Don Quixote for here. Like, I love that also. Is just, I mean, I want all those books to be published for real. And I also love it as like a lesson, because every time you try a new genre, you experiment with speculative, you experiment with like rewriting something, you just learn something new about your own process and how you do things. And it's exciting, and it's also like super hard. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Look forward to reading it. I mean, you know, we touch on plot, and man, and we talked about Shudder. Shudder has plot. Is
Yeah.
that book has strong plot. So it's just sort of, you can do it all. A book can have all of it. It's hard, but it, you know, and I'm not saying I've done it, but it can have all of it. And that's the goal, right? So
Yeah, totally.
faith in you. Totally. Can't wait to read it.
Thanks.
Excellent. Don, you're working on a book of short stories?
Yeah, it's pretty much done. It's my dissertation for the PhD program. It's about 16 to 18 stories. But I also have a climate fiction novella that's about 60 pages, which I'll probably throw away, but it
Is it
exists
climate
there.
fiction?
No,
No.
no.
It's very fun.
You know, I was really energetic and excited about it, and then I just like because you know it's too plot driven. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh god. But you know, it lives there, and I thought maybe it's supposed to be a series of novels, and I've plotted them all out, and they're all outlined, and I could write them if I wanted to, but it doesn't entertain me as much. But I might get back to it. But I do have a collection of short stories. Yeah, that's the big thing that I hope to have out soon.
Okay, my one suggestion is take those summaries and just turn them into the books themselves. No, just run the summaries as is. You know, like Roberto Bolaño did in his book of famous Nazis of South America, you know, and which is a book you can sort of get into in a terrifying way. But seriously, that sounds really good. You know,
Yeah.
novellas about climate change. And of course, they're going to get smaller and smaller because we're all going underwater. So I see Roger is here.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with Don directly, but I think this is a tremendously interesting moment in Hawaii, particularly in the Hawaiian culture and the Renaissance, and a lot of really deep thinking is going on there. What is missing is the fiction in that intellectual ferment. But you know, I've adopted this theme in programming this festival of, you know, Hawaii 2.0 model for the planet, ? Meaning in some ways, yes, in other ways, obviously not. But I think it's the most interesting time I can remember in the last 30 years. It's just bubbling, but I don't see the fiction really connected to it. And I think there's a real opportunity there. And I think I think that's what would get New York interested if it has to be New York. Certainly get publishing alive again here, because it's very limited at the moment for economic reasons. In programming fiction from major mainland writers, I have a really hard time getting support for it. But because I think people are really thinking about what's going on right here. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, I guess we have marching orders to write more fiction. I've always wanted to hear that from somebody.
Well, anyway, thank you very much. It was a really interesting discussion. And,
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. Thanks, Tiana, Donald, Chris. That was really great. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks.
And
Thank
everyone,
you, everyone.
Yeah,
everyone
hey, Google THROB. Check it out. It's awesome. Done.
Hawaii Review of Books.com.
You gotta, oh yeah, there you go. Okay.
And you're all invited to submit and review books, please. And anyone who wants to pitch in and help run a literary magazine for no money. Hey.
Here's your opportunity.
Yeah,
That's the life of a writer.
Yeah. Send me your huddled, you're hopeless. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Very good. Good night, everyone.
You guys.